Hindsight is a wonderful thing, right? 2020 has been a year of winners and also losers for investment markets. Picking some of those winners back in March would have seen a £1,000 investment nearly triple to reach £2,900. In this video, I'm looking at new analysis from a financial trading platform which has looked at key events this year and their impact on investment markets. They have come up with the top 5 pandemic-proof businesses for investors in 2020. Can you guess what they might be? Hi everyone, I'm Martin Bamford, a chartered financial planner at Informed Choice. On this channel, I chat about personal finance, investing and happiness, and I make these videos to help you become wealthier but also happier. If that sounds like a great result, click on that little red subscribe button to become part of our subscriber community. It's completely free and you'll never miss an episode. I've had a press release land in my inbox today from the financial trading platform Stake, and they've identified the top 5 pandemic-proof stocks for investors since March 2020. They've calculated that £1,000 invested back in a portfolio of these 5 stocks in March would be worth £2,900 today, nearly tripling your money. Before I dive into this one, clearly it's all about hindsight. We didn't know, none of us knew back in March what was going to happen next. And the future of these businesses I talk about today could well be very different from their future back then. So this is not a recommendation to buy, sell or hold, but hopefully an interesting look at the businesses that have done well throughout the pandemic, some of their common factors, a bit of a reflective look back through the year. Stake also looks at the sectors that have been sensitive to the events of 2020, but have still seen some positive gains since the market correction back in March. But let's start with these pandemic-proof stocks and what they tell us about some of the key investment trends of 2020. There are some common themes throughout these because they are businesses offering services that we all wanted or needed when we were forced to stay at home during the pandemic. The first one, which I'm sure we're all intimately familiar with now, is Zoom. At the start of this year, Zoom shares were around $61.20. That rose to $106 when the pandemic started in March, and the shares are now sitting at $362. That has been a 491% growth throughout the year. Have you been using Zoom this year like I have been? My record, I think, was 7 Zoom calls in one day, not something I'm trying to do routinely. I was a big fan of Zoom meetings before the pandemic because it's just so much more efficient for me to meet people via a video call than it is to get in the car and drive to meetings, especially here in Surrey where traffic is usually dreadful and it can take an hour just to drive 10 miles up the road to the nearest town, to the nearest train station. I think once the pandemic is over and things have returned to normal, whatever that might be, video conferencing will still be a feature of our working lives. And that's because if I can do 1 or 2 face-to-face meetings in a day, or I can do 6 to 7 Zoom meetings in the same amount of time, I become far more productive doing the latter. Plus, real-life meetings are just a bit too people-y for my liking now, so I'm going to stick to Zoom. Pandemic-proof stock number 2 was Slack, remote working. Slack started this year at $23.02. It dropped to $17.04 when the pandemic broke out, and then it increased to $29.93. That's a 76% rise since the start of the pandemic. The recent news around the Salesforce acquisition of Slack has pushed the price even higher, $43.87. The recent news around the Salesforce acquisition has pushed the price even higher to $43.84. That's an increase of 90% since the start of this year. I've never used Slack, so I can't really comment on how it might improve business communication, business efficiency, but I know lots of people are fans of this software, and if it replaces email, then that is probably a good thing. Pandemic-proof stock number 3 is Amazon for remote shopping. Amazon, the most valuable share to make this top 5 list. It began the year at $1,898 before dropping to $1,689 when the pandemic initially broke out. Since then, it's now risen to $3,098 with a big increase of 63% since its pre-pandemic levels. I'll admit it, I am a big big user of Amazon, and I hate saying that because it's contributing to the death of the high street, and I do try my best to be a supporter of our local independent retailers. But Amazon is just so scarily convenient, and that's why their business, I think, performs so well. Pandemic-proof stock number 4 is Netflix, so remote entertainment. Netflix also took an initial dip during the pandemic from $329 down to $298. However, since becoming one of the main forms of entertainment this year, we haven't had much else to do, have we? It's risen by 45% to $476.62. So yeah, from a personal point of view, we've got Netflix, we've also got Amazon Prime, Apple TV, Disney Plus, and Now TV. One of my 2021 resolutions is to cancel one or two of these streaming services because I try not to watch that much television. But this convenience of television on demand, rather than having to fit in with a television schedule, is apparently the winner here. Convenience, that seems to be the theme that's driving up the price of these stocks. Perhaps the pandemic has been a bit of a catalyst for these businesses, but I think they would have done well regardless in time. The pandemic's just sped things up a little bit. And then pandemic-proof stock number 5 is Peloton, remote exercise. So as people around the world turn to new forms of exercise because we were confined to our homes, shares in Peloton's virtual exercise classes rose by 112% this year, from $29.74 to $112.05. I bought myself a Peloton bike in October. It was delivered actually in the week that I came down with COVID, so I couldn't use it for a few weeks when it got here. And it is an incredible bit of kit. The virtual classes, the gamification of exercise, and again, that C word, convenience, being able to work out on demand, all makes it a really powerful, a really efficient tool. I've got no plans personally to head back to the gym once COVID restrictions are lifted, because I can get a decent workout in at home now with my Peloton, and I'm still enjoying it, 3 months later. So those are the 5 pandemic-proof stocks that Stake identified as the top performers since March this year. They also looked at the sectors that could not function remotely, such as the travel and resort industry. But operational challenges aside, some of the most pandemic-sensitive stocks, those that are really influenced by our changing behaviour, have rallied since their March lows. And by way of example, they talk about Royal Caribbean Cruises, which initially saw a 78% drop from $134.65 down to $29.94 at the start of the pandemic. But it's since grown 153% since March to reach $75.78. Look, I can't see people heading back onto cruise ships anytime soon. I was quite nervous about them, with pre-pandemic headlines about norovirus outbreaks on board, for example. But clearly the cruise ship sector, it appeals to a certain demographic, and perhaps that demographic will really want to get out there once that vaccine rollout's in place. People want to escape their homes. They want to explore the world in a safe way. Cruise ships and the cruise sector could benefit from that. Stake also pointed out that the US stock market as a whole has recovered much swifter than the UK since March. The benchmark FTSE 100 index in the UK was at 7,604 points at the start of the year. It dropped to 5,151 in March. Currently, it's recovering. It's around 6,410. That's a 24% rise since March and a net drop of just minus 16 since January. But by way of contrast, the US's S&P 500 benchmark was at 324.87 in January. It dropped to 239.85 in March. It has since bounced back to 360.76. That is a 50% rise since March and a positive 11% increase since the start of this year. Matthew Leibowitz, who is CEO of Stake, said, "You only have to look at the markets to see what a strange and inconsistent year 2020 has been across the globe. It has been reassuring, however, that even with an ongoing global pandemic and a presidential election like no other, that the markets have managed to not only survive, but bounce back, and in some cases, bounce back stronger than ever." Did you have any of those pandemic-proof stocks in your portfolio all the way back in March? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching this video. Are you already part of our subscriber community here on YouTube? If you are, thank you for supporting these videos. If not, click on that little red subscribe button to become part of our subscriber community. It's completely free and you will never miss an episode. Until next time, I'm Martin Bamford, and remember, when it comes to your money, the more you know, the faster it can grow.